Welcome to another episode of Gender Stories. I know I always say I'm excited, but I am genuinely so excited to be interviewing Dilo today for you all, Gender Stories listeners and watchers now, for those of you who are also watching on YouTube. Dilo is a queer, transgender, Tamil-Sri Lankan-American actor, writer, and comic. He has toured his solo shows internationally, and his last show, To Tea or Not to Tea, was running last year at the Kirk Douglas Theater in LA. Acting credits include Looking, Transparent, Sense8, and MR.ROBOT, Connecting, Quantum Leap, and Billy Eichner Movie Bros. He's a Senior Civic Media Fellow through USC's Annenberg Innovation Lab, funded by the MacArthur Foundation. His work has been published and or written about in academic journals, literary anthologies, and print online journalism sources such as LA Times, The Guardian, NBC, CNN, and The Advocate. And I just feel so honored that you made some time for this interview today. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. I always love talking to people, and I don't know, I felt like we had too much in common. You know what I'm talking about. So, I was like, this is just off of that, I felt like this is someone I could trust with my heart.
Oh my God, that means so much to me. I felt so good too because we met when doing this in gender and love
Mhm.
thing, panel thing. And yeah, I felt that connection too. I felt so good to hear that. And then I saw you post something on Instagram about bidets. And I was like,
And
I
that,
feel that so strongly too. And that's how we connected. I was like, let's do this. Let's get to know each other a little better. And let's also record a podcast episode. So thank you so much.
yes, absolutely.
Oh, well, so let's talk about actually the power of language and story, right? Because that's in a way that's how we met, was through sharing some of our experiences and stories. And I think that for many folks in minoritized communities, including trans community, queer communities, there is a real power to sharing our stories and sharing our voices in this way. So tell me a little bit more about, like, why is it so important for you to share your stories in all this beautiful different media as you do?
Yeah, I think that for me, it started with me. My career started, or my artistic practice started in regards to the writing, because I was playing music before. But
Hmm.
in regards to writing, I was a poet. I still am a poet,
Hmm.
and so. But the poetry when I was younger was really about larger issues like the state of our world, the state in our society, the police state, war, as sort of like a, not just about the Sri Lankan civil war, but just our civil wars here on this land, and
Hmm.
everything about queer issues to AIDS to everything, And when I came out to my parents, like 2 months before I graduated college, I moved to New York, and there were things that were happening to me like on a heart level that I just didn't have an outlet for. And I was sitting there still doing the poems and the poetry, but I felt like I wanted to share more, not to the audience, but
Be great.
so I think I started by saying that it was very strange for me, especially like looking back, to think that I was connecting with audiences on these
Hmm.
bigger issues, like having a point of connection, when in actuality, when I started writing about what was deeply personal and with specificity, that I started having such a deep connection with my audiences. Because as one of my mentors and teachers says, Shari Moraga, she says that um, the more details and specificity you provide in your story, the more universal it becomes. And it's such an interesting thing, right? Like, you
Yes.
and I probably have less in common outside of our queerness, and queerness can be a blanket
Hmm.
because we all know that there's so many different ways of being queer, and yet we will be able to connect based off of the specificities in our stories. Those little hidden gems that are
Hmm.
there are where there's deeper points of connection. So, so that's when I realized, the power of storytelling from a very personal space, and that the personal is
Mm-hmm.
political, and vice versa, and that you could storytell in a way that changes people, like
Yes.
literally rocks them on such a deep foundational level that they are changed the minute that they leave that space with you, you know? So I am interested in that kind of power, and empowering people to be desirous of that kind of power as well, you know? Um,
Mm-hmm.
we oftentimes talk about how, like representation matters. Like it does. And I'm not saying anything to like naysay against that,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that our freedom is most important. Our personal freedom is most important. And we can get free as a collective, you know? So I think that story is the binding agent in that I know that it's the thing that I use to create collective healing.
I love that. I'm getting chills actually as you're talking about this because as you were saying that, I was thinking, yeah, this common threads of our humanity, right? That we
Mm-hmm.
can weave together through the power of story. I'm thinking about um, Everything Everywhere All at Once. Did I remember the title correctly? It was
Mm-hmm.
such an amazing movie, right? Totally far from my experience as a Southern Italian person who's moved first to the UK and then to Italy, right? But there was so many things that I felt deeply connected to. And then my oldest kid was like, I need to watch this movie with you, mom, and we're watching this movie and we're holding hands and we're crying, and again, no shared identities in
Mm-hmm.
terms of an Asian American experience, but there were threads of connection around like, intergenerational trauma and parenting and just yes, there were so many threads that we could still connect to. And it is transformative when we can connect you know, um, across differences, but also kind of things that bring us together as humans. I don't
Yes,
know. It's such a weird, complex dance for
it
me
is.
always.
It is. It is a very magical thing. It is a very magical thing because you sometimes you go in and you don't expect to connect. And
Exactly.
that's the thing. We don't expect to connect because we're fearful of the opposite of what that is, right? Like we're fearful for the
Hmm.
disconnection, for the violence, for this, that, and the other.
Yes.
And that's why I think it's so magical because a single point can do either or. And yet, more often than not, if you're dealing with somebody who's not like maybe like even if you're dealing with somebody who's like a little bit of an asshole, there still might be an opening to which that person might be able to grab onto your
Yeah.
story and vice versa, so yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I know that I've found connection unexpectedly with people where I thought we've got nothing in common. And then I've actually found disconnection with people where I thought, oh, we must have so much in common, right? You
Hmm.
can, I don't know, for me, you can never tell. And I love what you said that it's not just about your story. You also help people tell their stories, right? You've done workshops to really help people learn how to tell their story or bring the story out. So tell me about what drew you to that, to kind of wanting to work with people and helping them tell their own stories as well.
Yeah, I think that I kind of got pulled into doing workshops when I was touring the college university circuit.
Mm-hmm.
And based off of whatever I was learning, I would sort of incorporate some things and then add my own sort of twist to things. But in the like more specific types of workshops that I do, the main reason why I wanted to do those is because it was there were situations in which I was dealing with, not dealing with, but hearing a lot of stories around people's mental health decline and rates of death by suicide. So these were reasons for me to be like, let me just do these and see what happens, And, sometimes with like, this is just an example, but, one of the organizations I worked with, Satrang, is a South Asian queer organization that has been organizing in Los Angeles for 25 years, And they would have these parties and everybody would come out to them, and it would be like a big Bollywood or something like that, something very Indian, South Asian, or northern Indian, right? Or you know what I'm talking about. So I would come there as a first generation American, right? And not really know how to connect with these folks, right? And I was like, oh, I would just come to support, but I didn't really love the music. I didn't get it. It wasn't my part of my culture, right? And then I kept going to these just as a supporter, just as somebody who would, knew that there were like brown folks, queer folks partying. And at these parties, I would see like people wilding out. Like it was almost like that amount of freedom to just be queer and brown and open about it and just letting go of everything was almost too much freedom. It was almost like we have people like either getting really drunk or like, different things like that. And so I was like, there's something clearly missing here if we're not able to provide another sort of space outside of the party space. And I brought the idea of the workshop to the organizers, and everybody's like, I don't know. And and I said, look, you don't have to pay me for this first go round. Let me just do it. And sure enough, it was like such a beautiful, deep, profound experience. And I made all of the workshop participants invite people they normally would not invite to this public reading, right? So we had people coming in that room that were probably haters or people who were coworkers and didn't know that their friend was queer or whatever. And they were all mobbed up. We had over 100 people in this joint. And story by story we shared, and it changed. Like what was happening in that room changed people. Like they were getting their freedom, and then that word of it got around and whatever. And it was actually like people who usually went to the parties who actually came to the reading that were like, oh my God, I didn't realize I needed to be here. And then they would sign up for the workshop the next go round, and I think that it's a sad thing. And I brought this up on that panel that we were on, but you cannot quantify the impact of community-based artists and these types of workshop settings. And so you really aren't ever going to get the full scope of how profound these experiences are. Like it's arts making, it's writing, it's a process, it's a decolonial process that is occurring in the, like it's happening strategically because I'm the facilitator, but it's also just happening on a deep level just by the converging of people, And so, sorry, I don't mean to talk so long, but I'm saying that
please do.
This kind of thing is what, like, it makes me so sad that we can't use metrics to prove that these things are life-changing, truly transformative experiences, and not just for me, because recently I haven't really been teaching the courses. I have a lot of mentees, but to do this work, it's easier for me to walk with a mentee. I'm not getting paid. They might buy me lunch or a coffee. Do you get what I'm saying? And it's more
Yep.
sustainable for me than it is to actually do the workshops with no money,
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
So,
Hmm.
so yeah, that's my 2 cents. A
It's
very
a beautiful,
long-winded 2 cents.
it's a beautiful 2 cents, and it's just that, oh, what you were talking, I was thinking about how much healing that brings, right? I'm a
Mhm.
therapist in terms of what I do with my day job. And one thing that keeps, hitting me is just how finally kind of Western traditional psychotherapy is catching up to healing traditions, right? Because I really feel like the therapists we're just the latest manifestation of healers, under this
Yes.
capitalist white supremacist world. But really, people need healing, and actually what's happening now is that we're coming back full circle in some ways. There's this interest in somatic and art and bringing the body, and I was like, of course, this is, I didn't grow up in a therapy culture. Where I got my healing was through community, worship. Then, of course, it got problematic because, right, it was an exclusionary worship for me as a trans queer person. But moving together, singing with people, dancing with people. And then when I came out as queer, where I got my healing was dancing at the club. It was also
Mhm.
problematic because people were also trying to find their healing through alcohol and substance use.
Mhm.
But I
Mhm.
found a lot of my healing through connecting, through dancing and moving, and or queer choir. Those are
Mhm.
the ways we feed our soul, right? Poetry readings, all of that. So I'm like,
Mhm.
as you were talking, I was like, yes, yes, yes. Sorry, that was a long comment on your
No,
two
I love
cents,
it.
but there you go.
Yeah.
We touched just a little bit, like you mentioned, representation, right? We started with the power of story, but there's also this power of representation. And you have been in kind of a number of like shows, and as well as doing your own solo work. Why do you think it's important for you as a Tamil-Sri Lankan-American trans queer actor to be out there and be visible? Um, and for more and more diverse representation, because in a way I feel like 20 years ago, with trans people, it was like the Highlander syndrome, that can only be one, right? And
Mhm.
now we're finally in a place where maybe that can be like a few of us in a show,
Yeah.
right? Lately, somebody was like, we need the Alison Bechdel test, but for trans people, are
Mhm.
there several trans people? Do they have names? Are they talking to each other? Are they there not just to like die or be like a
Yeah.
plot point? You know what I mean? So, yeah, tell me a bit about your thoughts about representation, from your point of view as somebody who is an actor and who's out there representing in some ways.
Yeah. I feel that the more stories we have out there, the better. And in this conversation around representation, it's also like I'm not happy with just any kind of representation. Like I need it to be specifically like mindfully done, right?
Mm,
And I think that Hollywood, bless Hollywood's heart, might not get it right the majority of the time.
mhm.
Um, and yet we fight to have more truer representation. And I'm saying all of this stuff as sort of like a preface to the fact that like I've been in this game and I was, you know, right when the beginning of that trans wave started about 10 years ago,
Yep.
was doing a lot around representation and whatnot. And I have had the hardest time in this industry landing an agent or representation. I've had some here and there, but the only work that I felt like I could put out there and do it on my own name and is my own personal work, right? Like anything else that was bigger than that was scripted would take a lot more money, and it has. I've definitely doled out enough of my own money to do things. Um, I I know that there is a lane to do that, but it's very few people who are on that path even now. And the amount of
Yes.
power they wield is even less. and it typically is in the hands of a lot of white queer
Mm-hmm.
people, right? And
Yep.
so, and I'm not mad at that because I have a lot
Mm-hmm.
of friends, acquaintances, colleagues that are all, that are white and trans or white and queer, and they're making headway, and I'm so grateful for that. But I think that when I like, I think recently, because I've been in a lot of conversations around representation, I don't mind that there are people who are not trans or queer who are collaborating with me on stories that uplift marginalized voices. They don't need to be only queer. They don't need to be
Mm-hmm.
only, I mean, in my heart, I want to this is me. This is just me, but I only want to be creating with other BIPOC folks. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
But
Yep.
but I'm not opposed to collaborations that are that that need a special eye that maybe I'm not getting within my own
Mm.
circles. Sorry, I'm going to go off tangent. I'm going
That's
to try and
okay.
stay on tangent. Do they say that? Who knows?
I don't know. You can
But
go on or off wherever you want.
yeah, but I think that when I've been having these conversations about representation, what I really want to say is representation matters, and it also is not the only thing that matters.
Absolutely.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
it matters if it's done in a way that is really like able to penetrate and change things or empower people, and it's not just about sticking one, like you said, as the plot line or whatever.
Yeah.
We joked on one panel that we want to see shows where there's more than one trans queer
Mm.
person. And then I thought, well, why don't we take all the characters that are just the one trans person on the show and then create a show around their individual characters on another show? Um, but where I want to land with this question is again back to
Mm-hmm.
personal freedom.
Yes.
I think that we have to pick and choose our battles, and some battles are done on an industry level, and some battles are done on a community based level, and some battles are
Mm-hmm.
taking place from within our hearts. And I think that the if everybody's like, I need to see me in that medium, and then I'm not going to be, otherwise I won't see myself in the way that I want to be seeing myself, then
Mm-hmm.
that's the biggest problem, is
Yes.
that what we ingest doesn't necessarily have to come from that. Like, I know for me, what I ingested came from stage and from the page. And so in
Mm-hmm.
that way, I think that representation all across the board matter, but it's not just who we're seeing on the screen. I know that that's so important, but it's not just that.
Oh, absolutely. It cannot be the be all and end all. And like you said, also representation is like what kind of representation, right? Is it
Mm-hmm.
intentional? Is it mindful? Is it transformative? You talked about the transformative power of story, right? Is it stereotypical or is it transformative? Is it, and also who's writing those characters, right? It's not just the actors, but who's in the writing room.
Yes.
I mean, those poor writing rooms, everybody's on strike at the moment, but I
Yeah.
think still on strike, right?
Yeah.
I've lost track of news lately, but it's so complex.
It
It
is
is. I
very
know
complex.
it
Yeah.
is. Yeah, because otherwise you get visibility and being targeted for that visibility without that change, which I think in some way we're seeing in trans community right now, right? There was that tipping point, Laverne Cox on the cover of Time, and all of those beautiful things, I'm in my 50s. I've definitely seen trans and queer people, be much more visible in ways that I never expected potentially in my lifetime.
Hmm.
And I've also seen the backlash on
Yeah.
that, and
Exactly.
also like then who suffers the most, right? They're going to be
Hmm.
the folks in our community who have the least access and the least privilege. And so it becomes, I don't know, it's complicated, as
It is
many
very
things are in
complicated.
life.
I'm so happy that there is so much more representation, and I'm like,
Hmm.
but what are we doing for our people on a deep level? Like,
Exactly.
how is this helping if we're already on the margins, but then there's even margins within that margin, yeah.
Absolutely. And
So
who
when
gets to be at the center? Yeah.
who gets to be in the center? And so that's why I'm always like personal freedom, because it's personal freedom to me. Before, I used to hear that and I'd be like, well, how does that attach to the rest of the world? And then I
Mm,
realized, oh no, this attaches to the rest of the world in such a profound way, because again, it's when we are healing in community, it's when we're creating in community, it's when we're like, then we become the healthiest, right? And
yeah,
then the ripple effect is grand.
absolutely. Oh, I love that. Oh, I feel like I feel like there's 500 tangents in my head, and that's okay. That often happens. But talking about those kind of personal story, the personal freedom, I do want to touch on your latest. I think it's your latest solo show, right? To
Mhm.
tea or not to tea. And yeah, what is that about? I'm not in California, so I didn't get to see it, but
Yeah,
I bet it was
yeah,
awesome. So yeah, tell us about that show, why you wrote it, what it means to you, all of that good stuff.
yeah. Tati or Not Tati was a solo show, second of a trilogy around, what my reflections on taking tea, the choices that I made to take
Hmm.
tea, or the decision process behind that, but also like, what does beautiful masculinity look like? We always throw around toxic masculinity, but it's kind of like, okay, like that's just patriarchy. Like that's in the
Yeah,
ether. Anybody can be a toxic masculine person.
yeah.
But but what does beautiful masculinity mean? Kind of flips it for the people who proudly ID as masculine, and or a blend or whatever, but some kind of
Hmm.
masculinity, and say, okay, like what does this look like for me? So I kind of talk about, like, growing up and the sort of understanding of masculinity that I had via TV and my culture, and the culture that I also, my
Hmm.
artistic um, community. And then I go into my journey into, not into feminism, but as a feminist, because
Okay.
I feel like a lot of people, I remember when I first said this, but I feel like one of my first feminist teachers was Queen Latifah. And
Mm.
this was as a young kid in the 80s, listening to her lyrics as an MC. And so fast forward to me learning from these very incredible scholars slash artists, these feminist scholars that wrote The Bridge Called My Back, and
Hmm.
other beautiful books and poetry books. But when I talk to these very same people in these communities, and as I was a part of these women's circles, I was like right before millennial. And so what happens is that I started getting this messaging like, you don't want to be a man. Like, why would you want to do that? Like, men are
Yeah.
what's wrong with this world, and et cetera, et cetera. So I drank enough of that to not really think that I had a decision, like that I had decision making power, because I was like, why do I want to do this? Am I turning my back on
Mm.
women and feminists and whatever? And where I land is that, I have to do what it is. I'm the only person who is living in this reality with
Yeah.
this, with my past histories, twirling around in
Hmm.
my brain and in my heart. And if this is what I want to just kind of see if this could be something for me, then I'm going to try that. And throw it back at these feminists who probably didn't mean to be turfy, but accidentally were,
Yeah.
um, and say, isn't feminist men what you've always wished for? You know,
Yeah.
and just leave it at that. Like, I get the optics. I get that masculine women and people who are seen as masculine women are like examples of a fuck you. But
Hmm.
it's like, at what cost? Our
Yes.
queer peoples, we have such, like, already we're like, oh yeah, we're challenging gender norms and da da da, but we still have
Hmm.
a very binary way of looking at gender, and it's just the same way that we do a lot of things. And so meaning that it's just in the ether. We smell it and like
Yeah.
it's there affecting us. And so my work recently has been around the intersections of mental health and masculinity, queerness, of course. But, you know, what, what kind of invisibilization happens as you transition, the
Yeah.
flip side of visibility, and how are we like, are we just again being subsumed into this community of people, and then our needs are not ever brought to light, like a lot of butch or stud or
Mm-hmm.
masculine of center or AG or whoever you want to call it,
Mm-hmm.
our needs weren't put up at the very top because we were being good lovers of femmes and women, you know?
Yeah.
And so all of our shit just gets tucked under someplace else, and we have to try and figure that out. And yet we're not, because again, patriarchy, we're not talking to each other,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera, et cetera. So
Yeah.
this is the work that I'm trying to do right now. I have this project as sort of like a next step to this. It's not a solo based piece, but it's called Cry With You, or the Uncles Project, in which myself and I've already prototyped it once just with me, but what I dream of is having a whole bunch of men of color from
Mm-hmm.
the whole gender spectrum to offer to hold space for other people as a
Mm-hmm.
public installation or a busking project. And so that piece is, the question that's framing this piece is, why can't men be seen as nurturers or as
Yes.
safe spaces? And so
Mm-hmm.
kind of throwing back the onus of our own people to take care of one another, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because and not have the burden of caretaking to be on the shoulders of femmes and women all the time.
Oh, that is so beautiful. And also it just kind of oh, I have so many feelings and thoughts listening to you talking about that, because having been brought up as a second wave feminist, I worked so hard, like, oh, is this my internalized misogyny? I wanted to really celebrate and embrace my femininity. Coming out was really hard. It took me into my early 30s to finally be like, I'm definitely genderqueer,
Mm-hmm.
on the masculine end of the spectrum, but I'm also on a very effeminate masculinity. The
Mm-hmm.
way I explained it to my mom was having a hard time understanding what was happening, honestly, with my sexuality and gender. I was like, Mom, if I'd been born a cis boy, I would be one of those cis boys who were like into musicals and Barbies and
Mm-hmm.
like super queer and who couldn't hide their queerness. It's still masculinity, but it's
Mm-hmm.
also there is a when I think when masculine people are nurturing, caring, is seen as almost stripping away the masculinity, right? Because
Yeah.
there is so much, what we call overcoupling in somatic therapy of like femininity with nurturance, right? So if
Uh-huh.
a masculine person is nurturing, then that almost strips away their
Yeah.
masculinity. It's so messed up,
I know.
and it's so traumatic, right?
It's
I
so
wrote a whole
traumatic, and
freaking book about it.
it's so basic. It's so
Yes,
basic.
yes,
Like,
I
what are
know.
we doing here?
Right? I love that this Mother's Day, I got this sweet text from my oldest kid was, and the stories I share about her with her consent was almost 20, and it was like, happy Mother's Day to my two dads, right? Because it's like, we always talk about being a mom as like a job, and actually, like my co-parent who is a cis man is much more of a mom than I ever
Mhm.
was. I'm much more like the fun, rough and tumble, but also like provider type of person,
Mhm.
in my family. So much more like traditionally masculine role, despite
Mhm.
like my effeminate masculinity. Whereas my cis male partner is definitely the mom, right? It's really
Mm.
hard for him to be away from home and family. And the first time he had to be separated from the baby was really hard.
Uh-huh.
He was a stay at home parent for a few years, but, and on one hand, people are like, oh, that is so beautiful. And on the other hand, I'm like, but that often is not what is wanted. I also see how people
Mhm.
move around that, right? The
Mhm.
confusion and the challenge and like you said, wasn't a point of having feminist men, but then when you get feminist men, often there's so much suspicion, there is so
Yep.
much pushback, there's so much like, you're not man enough, whatever that
Mhm.
means, right? I don't know. That's it. So,
Yeah.
yes. And
Yeah.
then when you layer all the other complexity of racialization, it's never just about gender, right? It's
Right.
never just about where gender
Right.
is also about we're racialized, whether we're disabled or not, whether,
Mhm.
what the class status is, all that kind of stuff. It just gets so messy. And yes, so
Yes.
simple. Like you said, so simple.
It's to me it's so simple, but when I say it's so basic, I'm also saying like it's you're you're trivializing the complexities and the depth in
Yes.
which people can exist, like
Yes.
why is it that when men show nurturing side that they're stripped of their being seen
Hmm.
as masculine? Then that's not even
Yeah.
about somebody having autonomy and how they even see their own masculinity.
Hmm.
Like,
Yes.
yeah.
And yeah. And it's that, like you said, is that personal freedom, that it's also collective freedom, right? Because we
Hmm.
can let ourselves be ourselves and let other people be themselves, then there is a collective freedom in that of expansiveness and
Hmm.
choice and beauty. I love that
Hmm.
you talked about beautiful masculinity, because I think that authenticity, that vulnerability is beautiful. And in a way, it's really denied in a lot of way for a lot of masculine folks, and
Yeah.
I think for masculine folks of color in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
And it is so simple, so complex, so basic, so foundational, all at the same time,
Yeah.
right? uh
Yeah.
yes. So I know, we're kind of going a little bit all over the map, but I think there's also a little bit of a theme around freedom, about expansion, about around beauty as well, right? The beauty of
Hmm.
transformation, the beauty of story. So I'm curious about nowadays, we're living through yet another moment, and I say yet another moment because this is not the first time in history, and unfortunately won't be the last, right? Where we're seeing really heightened, transphobia, really heightened queer phobia. I'm hearing some discourse I hadn't heard for some time, right? Being our community, being labeled as groomers and all this really ugly things that, have been used again and again around against people, and against queer people especially. So, how do you find that beauty and joy in your everyday life nowadays? Because I've been really curious about how we as a community are also finding rest and beauty and joy
Hmm.
to be able to get through yet another time. Like I said, yeah.
Great question. I was just doing a show this morning for a group, and the title of it was called Queer Joy. And I know I talk about queer joy a lot as a comic, but I often like, for me, queer joy and joy in general, where I find it is like with my beloveds. I'm going to always talk about community and people because that's my number one love,
Yes,
outside of bidets. And so,
that's fair.
and
I feel
so,
there's a connection there, but there you
yeah, totally.
go.
If we could all collectively use a bidet at the same time, then, life would be perfect. So, so I feel like, for me, outside of, you know, my people, it's
Mhm.
my people in nature, like being in nature, doing things like that, right? But you mentioned this thing about like we're in this moment in time that is like so hard. And I know that I'm in a safe state, quote unquote,
Mhm.
but I can't imagine the depths of the trauma occurring in people's hearts right now, because for me, as old as I am, my internalized transphobia and queerphobia are like hitting these
Mm-hmm.
heights because
Yeah.
I'm also listening to people spew this stuff. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, oh my God, like, and it's making me go all sorts of different places. And I almost have to snap myself out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, well, what is it? If this is happening to me in a safe state, as somebody who's
Yeah.
outwardly like, I'm out there being outspoken about stuff, then that means that people who are even like me are also dealing with this to some degree, right?
Yeah.
And I think, and so what I was telling everybody is I was like, I think that this is Pride. Yes, this is Pride Month, and we're all like, but I think it's more important than ever before because we assume that things have gotten better. So that's why it's even more important to pick
Yes.
up the phone and call people and tell them, without you, I wouldn't have been challenged in this way, or I know myself
Mm-hmm.
more because of this, and I appreciate the way you walk in this world. And do you get what I'm saying? Like those
Yes.
little touch points to people who are unsung heroes, who should really be sung heroes all day, every day, you know?
Yeah.
Because it takes courage to be who you are every damn day. And I think that that's something that
Mm-hmm.
you might not know for yourself. That's something that I don't know for myself. Do you get what I'm saying? But
Oh
it
yeah.
takes courage to just be who you fucking are every day. And so I feel like that's the antidote to not having joy, is to remember joy in the reflections of ourselves, right? Which are other people, our
Mm-hmm.
community, our best friends, our chosen
Yeah.
family, sometimes our families of origin, but generally not. They're trying now
Yeah.
more than ever,
They're doing their
but
best.
they're doing their best. But yeah, like that to me is, I find joy in my young little nieces and nephews. Like I find, but it's always about like that energy and that joy that is like, it's there, it's palpable between two bodies or a group of bodies,
Mm-hmm.
and that to me is what, that joy is revolutionary. It's what keeps me alive, on all the different
Yeah.
levels.
I really hear that. Sometimes people are like, how are you still doing? Are you still engaging in community at over 50? A lot of people like, just drift away from organizing or drift away from community engagement as we get older. And I'm like, because I don't know how to live without community. I need that. You know what I mean? It's like I need my elders. I also need my younger people to
Youngers,
learn
yes.
from and call me on my bullshit, which they do,
Mm-hmm.
thankfully. And I thank them every time.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't know how not to, like, this is how I survived as a queer person, right?
Yeah.
This is how, like, aren't relationships everything? Like,
Yep.
what else is there?
Yep.
If not relationships with our kin, like, which is
Mm-hmm.
people and as well as nature, the green bloods, right? Yes. Oh,
Yes.
well, and on that note, because I know you got another engagement to go on to, I just want to express my gratitude for your wisdom and beauty and time today, but also just generally about the beautiful work you create and how you move through the world. And just I'm so grateful for this connection that we found and for spending a little bit more time together today. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Alex. I had the best time. I think we're pretty much the same person.
Same person with just different histories, different experiences, but I
Exactly.
love it. I love it. I can't wait to share more stories.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, all
Yes.
right. For
Thank you.
today, I'm going to say goodbye and thank you to you all listeners for listening, for watching if you're on YouTube. As ever, let me know what you think about the episode. Subscribe, do your rating, do your thing, and thank you for spreading and spread joy in your life, in your community, in your relationship. Until next time.